The second, and last major assignment is the case study analysis. The purpose of this assignment is to assess your understanding of some of the theoretical perspectives presented in this course. This assignment would be at the apply level of Bloom's taxonomy, although it also involves analysis and evaluation. A case study has been provided since it is not possible to conduct this assignment with a real student, given our current situation. I think an analogy might be helpful for explaining what you need to do. In another course that I teach, we explore the question, what do we know about how students learn? And we investigate 6 different learning theories: classical conditioning, operant conditioning, information processing theory, psychological constructivism, social constructivism, and social cognitive theory. As a review activity, we consider how each theory would interpret a learning experience which is similar to this assignment. When he was young, John reached up to touch a hot stove and burned his hand. He never touched the hot stove again. Obviously, this would qualify as learning, since there has been a relatively permanent change in John's behavior as the result of an experience. But how would each learning theory explain how this learning occurred? Pavlov would likely say that the natural response to something causing us pain is to withdraw. The hot stove, a previously neutral stimulus, has become associated with pain and therefore John avoids hot stoves. Skinner would disagree, asserting that the behavior of touching the hot stove was followed by an unpleasant consequence, which resulted in a decrease in the frequency of the behavior. Information processing theorists would claim that clearly John paid attention to the sensory input on his hand. He added this information to his stove schema and encoded it into his long-term memory. Subsequently, when seeing a hot stove, he was able to retrieve or remember this information and avoid touching hot stoves. Piaget would argue that John's natural curiosity led to his experimentation with the hot stove. Since John's existing schema did not help him understand the experience, he would have been in a mental state of disequilibrium. Therefore, John would need to reorganize his existing schema or create a new schema, a process known as accommodation. In the future, he would be able to use this schema to understand what would happen if he touched another hot stove. As described, this learning experience would be difficult to interpret using social constructivism since John was alone. However, we can assume that there would have been some interaction with an adult following this incident, and likely the adult would explain that this is why hot stoves shouldn't be touched. Vygotsky would assert that in the future, John would use self-talk and then inner speech to guide his behavior around hot stoves. First between, then within. Bandura's social cognitive theory does not explain this learning experience as John learned firsthand, rather than by observing others. If there was a younger child in the room, and that child never touched a hot stove, Bandura would say it was because they had observed what happened to John, and experienced vicarious punishment. Each of these learning theories provides a reasonable explanation of how John learned not to touch a hot stove. So which one do you think is the best explanation? Perhaps you believe Piaget's psychological constructivism is best, or a combination of Skinner's operant conditioning and Vygotsky's social constructivism. Although I think I hear Vygotsky rolling over in his grave at that notion. Regardless, this is what you have to do for this assignment. None of these theories explain why John touched the hot stove. We would have to consider the theorists covered in this course to determine that. We would also need more information about the situation. Perhaps there was an unseen sibling provoking John, or John had an urge to transgress or was tempted by the glowing stove element. Maybe his parents failed to plan proactively by not using the back burner. Likely we will never know, but there is sufficient information in the case study for you to identify Connor's misbehavior and possible causal conditions. You will then need to adopt the mindset of 3 theorists and explain how each would interpret Connor's behavior. Imagine if Moorish or Glasser read the case study, what would they say? Then you have to decide which is the best explanation. Similar to John and the hot stove, you might think one of the theories makes the most sense, or perhaps aspects of several theories seem to apply. Finally, you need to recommend a course of action for Connor's teacher, Mr. Wilson. What should he do? When you review the rubric, you will notice that completeness and depth of understanding are again the 2 main criteria. For this assignment, completeness means that you have included all 3 parts. With respect to depth of understanding, I will be looking for whether you were able to accurately apply the theoretical ideas to explain Connor's behavior. if you focused on the most relevant and useful aspects of the theory in your explanation. And if your recommendations for Mr. Wilson are consistent with the thinking of the theorist identified in your summary explanation. If your summary explanation includes aspects of several theories, the chosen strategies must be complementary. There are links to more information on the theorists in the extension activities for weeks 3 and 4, although there are only a few links for the theorists in Chapter 4, so you may have to do some additional research if you choose one of them. The remaining rubric criteria relate to mechanics and style, and my advice in the video about the first assignment still applies. Since I am creating this video before that assignment has been submitted, I can't say if there are any areas that need attention. If there are any issues that apply to most of the class, I will mention it in one of the announcements. As always, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me, by email, phone, or by posting to the course discussion forum. I look forward to reading your analyses.